is out. Don't be surprised, check the internet. We may well have our first meeting at the temple, the synagogue of our speaker, Paul Zadek. The rabbi's going to speak, and he may well prefer to have it there. That's September. Homewood Cemetery coming up in October. We've had talks from them 3-4 years ago. We want to do that again. Interesting, fun thing, the Welsh in America, Western Pennsylvania, and Squirrel Hill in November. They asked to come and speak. And there's a connection with the Morrowfield, and we hope very much to have one of the Watkins, that's not guaranteed, speak in December about the Morrowfield. And then we'll go from there. Let's do this privately, but one of the things we're committed to is having a historic society from somewhere else come to speak once a year to us. And I'll take recommendations on the side after the meeting as to, we had Lawrenceville last time, as to which neighborhood you'd like to hear from in the spring. Come and tell me. Okay?
We should comment that the guy did not speak in March, but he spoke clearly on
Come and talk to me about it. Tonight, we're very pleased to have Helen Hanna Casey here. It's president of the Hanna Real Estate Company, which we all know, and she's going to talk about her life, Squirrel Hill, her company's origins, and wherever else this group, as usual, takes the discussion. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for coming out in this heat. Change date, which was originally the All-Star game. Now, I was home that night, so I could have done it, but I figured other people wanted to watch it, so that in preference to me. So I'm delighted to be here. I have to tell you that most people don't know that there's a Squirrel Hill Historical Society. And so we're pleased, as I said earlier, I'd like to put some information in our offices about it, not just for transferees, but for our own sales associates to know about it, because they don't know about it. And it's an incredibly rich neighborhood, isn't it? So before I can tell you about the company history, I'd like to tell you about my family's history in Squirrel Hill. In 1901, my great-grandmother's husband died. And she is a single woman and decides that she will build a house, move from downtown to Squirrel Hill. One of her friends, coupled with their children, moved, and she thought this would be a much nicer place to raise my children alone. And she built a house on Dalzell Place, which is, if you know, I don't know how much you know about Dalzell Place, but it's an interesting street. And the history of Dalzell Place is an interesting street is because in the early 20th century, people went in and bought these lots from a developer. And so there are about 8 houses on the street, 8 or 10 houses, I think, that are big center halls that were of the period, sort of that neoclassic colonial or something, with the 4 windows above and then 2 on either side, and the big front porch. And then that neighborhood didn't have a developer anymore. And they couldn't get anybody to sell off the lots or buy the lots. And so then another developer came in the 1920s. And so you see a whole shift in the architecture and the style of the houses. My grandmother did not build a garage. Why would she need one? My family lived in that house. Their name is Freibergel, and they lived in that house until 1952. And does anybody know what they did for a garage? It amazes me. Well, if you go to the corner, if you go to Wilkins Avenue, where it intersects with Beechwood, there's now a little office there, and for many of us who have been here for a long time, there used to be a gas station there. Well, that wasn't just a gas station, that was a garage where if you lived in Squirrel Hill, you drove there and they drove you home at night, and you called them or you told them what time to bring your car in the morning. It was a neighborhood garage. They were all over Pittsburgh. It was pretty common, evidently. And those houses are so close in Dalzell that you can't put in a driveway beside them. So their house that is the one with the circular driveway. So that's the beginning of our history. I'm back in Squirrel Hill. I live in 32 zip code, but about 500 or 600 feet from here on West Woodland Road, the little spur road that goes behind Chatham College, which people must not even realize that exists there either. But our company was started in the city, unlike any other real estate company really in Western Pennsylvania. Our origins are in the East End. My father was an economist by training who went to work for the home builders, went to work as a lobbyist for the National Association of Home Builders. In the early 1950s, a huge growth period for new housing, of course, in this country. And my parents were transferred to Cleveland. And they had just redone a house on Barron Street, and they had no desire to go to Cleveland, but that's where his job took him, so he commuted. But he got his real estate license just in case. He decided to leave there. And indeed, my father was retransferred 9 months later to Chicago, and he came back and went to work for a good friend of his father's who owned a company named Friday Real Estate. At that time, there were only 2 places in the East End where you had real estate companies. They were either in the heart of East Liberty, directly on the corner of where you now, if you go to the very trendy place, the trendy East Liberty, of Highland and Penn, or Highland and Baum, I guess that is, Highland and Baum, Highland and Center. Highland and Center right on the corner. The Red Room is a restaurant there, and it's, I guess, taken over now by Whole Foods, but that neighborhood was filled with real estate companies. And then the others were all on Murray Avenue. There were none in between. So we didn't open either of those. It was my family's sort of trademark through the years. They opened instead on Craig Street, where there were no real estate companies, and began to build a real estate company. My father did something very interesting. Our company is 50 years old next year. And 2 weeks after he opened the company, they formed, he got a call from somebody, and if you don't remember those days, back then when you sold your house, no other brokers could show it. Only the broker who had your listing could show your house. Nobody else was allowed in. And that's why my father left the company that he was with. And somebody called him and said, we have this idea, this Malta list, and you know about them from other cities, from being in the building and in the building trade business. And so come to this meeting. And 2 weeks after he started the business, they started the Malta list. And of course, today, Malta lists are the mainstay of every real estate operation throughout the country. They are the mainstay of what the internet is today. If you go to the Howard Hanna site, you see every listing that's on the Malta list, as you do with most major brokers throughout the country. So that was his beginning, 50 years ago next year. That first office was our only office for about probably 12 years, 13 years at that point, until we began our expansion mode. But my father had a small problem. He was not in the mainstream of other real estate companies. And he was, one office guy that needed to get some real estate agents, so he had this brilliant idea that he would hire women in real estate. Also almost unheard of in the 50s. Through the late 1960s, the majority of realtors were all men. And of course, that's the reverse is true today. About 73% of all realtors today are women. So a major difference. Though there are very few still women owners of major real estate companies anywhere in the country except here. So that's the beginning of our real estate career and how we sold real estate. That's not really how we grew our career in Squirrel Hill, and it took us a little while till we got that office in Squirrel Hill. We first went to Fox Chapel, was our first office, and then we went to Forest Hills. We went to those locations because that's where our clientele was moving. There was a great growth in Churchill, great growth in Fox Chapel, O'Hara neighborhoods, and so we went there. I actually went to our 5th office when we opened our 5th office, and that was in the North Hills, in the heart of the North Hills. I had never lived in the North Hills, didn't know anything about the North Hills, but my family was afraid of nepotism. So to avoid nepotism, later on we found out we were going to have nepotism no matter what we did, and I'll explain our family sort of semantics in a second. So I went to the North Hills, not knowing anything about it, to learn how to sell real estate. So that is the beginning of our company spreading throughout. We have now 113 offices. Many of those offices we opened new, but some of our best locations are by acquisition. Most interest to Squirrel Hill is that we acquired in 1987 the Spiro Real Estate Company, which was a well-known real estate company, started in the 60s by a woman, Gertrude Spiro, and Myra Spiro, her husband, very well respected. And they were always the competition to beat throughout the 70s. And by the mid-1980s, we were at about a 25% market share meaning 25% of all the houses sold in Squirrel Hill were sold by us. Out of about, at that point, we were about 35 different real estate companies selling in Squirrel Hill, so vastly different than today. There are many less real estate companies. Today, our market share is about 38%, and our average sales price is about $260,000 in the Squirrel Hill market. So after Sparrow, which was our first major acquisition, we began to acquire companies in different locations, some of them being two-people companies, some being in Erie. We acquired a 5-office company of 125 people, which was a company named Spiegel. We also acquired in Cleveland. Our most recent large acquisition was Smythe Kramer. I don't know if any of you are from Cleveland. I know Mike does a lot of work there, but Cleveland Smythe Kramer had 30 offices that we acquired there. But in addition to acquiring, the majority of the original Howard Hanna offices are owned by us. It has been really how we have grown the business is that we have grown from that center, as I explained. So we started in the East End, and from the East End just kept forming that circle larger and larger. And in directions that our clients were going, for instance, we had an office, which still seems an anomaly to somebody, we have an office in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Anybody know where Apollo is? In Armstrong County. It's a limited group, but if you want to know about history, Vandegrift, okay? Vandegrift is a wonderful historical society, by the way. Yeah, it's a wonderful little town and a great historical society and restoration they've done. And in New Kensington, so it's a surprise to people that we're in those markets. But those are very strong markets for people that moved from one river town to another river town. So they started in Block and just kept going out and out and out. And now, today, Buffalo Township, which is beyond New Kensington, is one of the fastest growth areas in western Pennsylvania. So if you look at us today, the total of 113 offices, we have offices in Morgantown, West Virginia, Wheeling, West Virginia. So we have 6 offices in West Virginia now. We also, in addition, we have 2 offices in New York State, Chautauqua and Fredonia. So if you go to Chautauqua in the summer, it's great because we have all of these signs all over the place. It looks really neat. And and in Ohio, we have now about 43 offices. So we've grown dramatically in Ohio, 13 offices in the past 3 years since we bought them, so that's a big growth. We were already in the Youngstown area. We did go into Florida in 1990, and we're in Florida for 10 years. It's a very different world in Florida than here. Most people would say, why would you leave there? My mother would often ask, why would you leave there to go to Youngstown, Ohio? Youngstown, Ohio is more like Pittsburgh, I think, is the primary reason. Yes, the prices in Florida are much higher. We are in no markets where we have heavy escalation. There isn't anywhere where Howard Hanna has chosen to open an office where houses, go up by 25% a year. We are in sturdy neighborhood communities, and we are a community-based company. The reason we have so many offices is that we believe that although housing may be the same from neighborhood to neighborhood, it is still a neighborhood process that when somebody is buying or selling a house, that they want to know that the people that they're working with know about that neighborhood. And that's why we have so many local offices. So in the city of Pittsburgh, we now have 5 offices. Squirrel Hill, which is up the street on Forbes. We have one on Craig Street, our condominium office. One on Baum, which is our Shadyside office. And now we've just opened our second downtown location. One on Grand Street in the Coppers building. We just opened the Gateway Towers. I don't know if any of you read the press releases last week from the Cultural Trust. But the Cultural Trust had an international competition for 12 teams. Were invited to submit proposals for what the new downtown cultural district should look like. 6-acre site along the river at 6th and between 6th and 8th. And our team, fortunately, was chosen. A company out of Washington, Newport Eastridge is the developer, and we're the marketing and advertising side of it for 700 units. So we have just opened a downtown location to begin the process of selling 700 units in a period of time. We're saying 10 years, and somebody questioned why it was so long. And And I would say, if everybody wants to move downtown, it won't be so long, but until we convince people that downtown is a place to live, it will be. One of the most interesting trends, though, for city dwellers, I think, in Pittsburgh, in the East End, has been the reintroduction of the suburban Pittsburgher back into the city after their children are gone. And many people have overlooked this entirely, but about a third of our buyers in certain neighborhoods and certain categories in the East End come from suburban markets, meaning they've raised their kids in Upper St. Clair, and they've lived in a 25-year-old colonial, and they want to come back, and they want to have a totally different lifestyle than they had before. So they come and they buy a house on Northumberland Street, which some young couple has restored themselves, or they restore themselves. It is a huge trend, and it's different than the rest of the country, because the rest of the country, this suburban trend has been seen to go downtown. Perhaps it's because we haven't had downtown lifestyle, but it may also be because we truly still have city neighborhoods that never had to be gentrified, and that makes us vastly different than other markets throughout the country. If you were to compare Cleveland, and it's the market I'm most knowledgeable about, so I would use it, Cleveland has 100,000 more people in the city of Cleveland than we do in Pittsburgh. So that would be a big, big leg up. But their poverty level is about 3 times as many people below the poverty level as we have here. And so they have many more poor in town, and they have less middle class. Their middle class in Cleveland, even though they have 450,000 people, has continued to diminish. And neighborhoods that, if you were to go to Cleveland, that look like Squirrel Hill, Cleveland Heights, are not in the city of Cleveland. So although they have a metropolitan form of government, they have reduced a lot of their municipalities, they do not have a strong city residency. And that's vastly different than Pittsburgh. I think it's one of the things that really creates the lifeblood of Pittsburgh. When people look at the number of how many people here, they really have to look at the kinds of people that still live in the city of Pittsburgh and the kinds of neighborhoods we have. And that those neighborhoods, like Squirrel Hill, have not had to be re-gentrified. Stores have always been here. As a matter of fact, I think most of us would agree that we have a bigger problem now probably than 5 years ago with stores that are left because of the waterfront, etc. But, so Pittsburgh is unique that way. And you don't find that in Minneapolis, which has a totally municipal form of government. You don't find it in Indianapolis. So cities that are very comparable to us in size do not experience the same kind of vibrant city living that we have. And that has enabled us to have a higher sales price here than you would have in any comparable neighborhood in other cities throughout the country. That sales price of $260,000 is a very strong number when you look at the demographics of Squirrel Hill and you look at where Squirrel Hill goes. But Squirrel Hill as a sales area is much larger than it used to be. When Greenfield was a different neighborhood than Squirrel Hill when I was first in the business. And today, Greenfield, of course, and Squirrel Hill, the lines have blurred, and it becomes one neighborhood. And that's important, we think, but it does happen. Point Breeze, the lines between Point Breeze and Squirrel Hill are less and less. If you go back to that early history of our family, people that lived in Squirrel Hill would walk to downtown at the turn of the century. Pretty amazing.
They would go to downtown for what activities?
Well, that's because that's where you shopped.
Okay, and they walk down?
They would walk to downtown. And it was an entirely different lifestyle. I mean, there weren't churches on every corner. There weren't convenience stores. You couldn't walk around the corner and go to the Capriccio and buy something to wear tonight to a party. You had to buy that fabric long before to have something made, probably. So the convenience that is developed in neighborhoods like Squirrel Hill is, vitally important to the future growth of what our neighborhoods are. And it's so important that we keep those strong. But one of the things about Howard Hanna as we have grown is we have also maintained our city offices, unlike other companies. An example again in Cleveland, we have just opened our first city office. The company we bought there is 100 years old. And they have not had an office in the city of Cleveland in 35 years. We just opened our first city office there after 35 years. But the vibrancy of what we do, I think, is although we are a city company at heart, we are also very strong in the suburban markets. People are very surprised to know that we also are in a number of other businesses. In 1979, we started our own title company, so we do not just closings, but actual title process that's required under Pennsylvania law when you buy a house or sell a house, the abstract for it. And in 1983, we opened our own mortgage company when the rates were 18%. We started by buying pension funds to use for our own clients. So we would go to a teacher's pension fund primarily, and we would say, we'll give you $25,000 if you agree to extend us a line of credit that will guarantee to get you 13%. It's a lot less than you'd have it for 20 or 30 years, so it's a lot better loan. And so since 1983, we have been doing our own mortgages. We have our insurance, and we insure not only homes, we insure auto, casualty, life, we do the whole gamut of insurance products. But we're also builders and developers, which people overlook. And so throughout Pittsburgh, we have developments. We either have land or we built. Our first development that we were involved in is on the corner of 5th and Nagley, a group of townhouses in front of the Children's Home. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's 6 Georgian townhouses right on the corner. Those were developed in the late 1960s. It was the site of the original Ellis School, and that was our first development. And we have done in the East End and throughout. We did a project over here on Bartlett Street about 14 years ago, which was redoing townhouses. We did another one on Beacon Street that we redid. We have one on Summerley Street in Shadyside, and a group of new townhouses on Baird. And in the 1980s, did about 40 condo conversions of small projects throughout Squirrel Hill and Shadyside. Today we develop on a little different scale. We have land developments which are as large as 1,200 homes, Treesdale, Seven Fields. The specific Pittsburgh ones, we have a new one opening in Murraysville, which is 300 homes in Westmoreland Farms, and commercial development that we have of small offices, and we own about 60 of our office locations today. So we do own land, we develop land, we don't build it anymore. We did build, but we no longer build. And we also have a specialty, a subspecialty in selling new construction. We started in new construction sales in the 1960s. We sold a co-op called the Bristol, which was the first new building to be built in a very long period of time, which is on Baird and Bigelow, right near the church, the Bristol, next to Belfield Towers. And from that, we began a division which specializes in condo sales, and is now a very large part of our business here and all of our other markets. And behind you, or wrapping around us, is really my pride and joy, because this piece of land was owned by a developer who also developed a building in Oakland called Belfield Place. And for 13 years, I tried desperately to get this site developed. And finally, they sold the land to a guy named Steve Masitis, who developed this and came up with this interesting concept of dividing it into 2 buildings. The previous owner had been rejected for wanting to put up a 9-story building, which was the
Or even
original.
also senior citizen use or something.
A senior citizen home was proposed. There is probably, if you were to go back, there were probably 20 or 30 different proposals. And really what they wanted was the 9-story building. So then they would put up all these things that nobody would ever allow, they would propose to put up, hoping that somebody would get the 9-story building. They never did get the 9-story building, but there is a unit for sale in the building right now for $1 million. So this building has had great appreciation over the years since it was built. It was a very successful project of 27 units. Ended up 26 because one unit was merged. Squirrel Hill, we think, is rife for needing more condominiums, by the way. It is not a location where new condominium buildings are built very often. The Imperial House was built in the 50s and 60s. Maxon Tower is a rental. So there are not really enough flat condominiums, lock it and leave it, to meet population needs this generation. And then by this generation of empty nesters, we speak of people who are 55 to 100, I guess, today are empty nesters. So we try to divide them between early empty nesters and later empty nesters. It's now, the average age for independent living is now 87 or 88 years old. And the average age for assisted living is 90 or something. So when you exclude those who are very ill, we have a growing population of people who are living longer, fortunately, and have different desires. And I jokingly say that I'm 57 and my father's going to be 87. I don't think we want to live in the same lifestyle. And so that's really the drive today, is how we meet the needs of our city communities to give them what they want for lifestyle choices, because the suburbs do have more lifestyle choices for people who want to leave their house, want maintenance-free living, etc. So we're trying to look at options to bring that back. So today we have a lot of things going on in the city in terms of new construction. If you have been to the new Giant Eagle Market District, has anybody been to the Market District? Do you love this grocery store? Isn't it wonderful? Except it's too crowded. Too crowded yesterday, but I think it's a great grocery store. And actually, I was privileged to tour Giant Eagles in other cities as they developed this concept, because part of that concept is the only place here east of Washington, D.C., or west of Washington, D.C., is the condo that sits above the Giant Eagle. A very unique wonderful. If you want someplace that's alive all the time, if you want someplace that has great security, 24-hour security, got great light outside, this is the place to be. But it's easy walking distance to everything, and it's probably the best priced project anywhere in town right now. The Lofts on Baum, which is near the Whole Foods. Grocery stores, I guess, are very popular in America. Everybody wants to spend their time at the grocery store. And the Lofts on Baum is a new building, and it's really loft apartments with 14-foot ceilings and a different lifestyle choice. And we have a new project on Neville Street in Oakland called Metropolitan, and that is a luxury condominium that's going up.
Are you doing the marketing on that?
Yes, we are. And that building is about 45% sold by units and about 60% sold by square footage. And I would say that so far probably 35% of the buyers, maybe 45 comments rather than shady side or outside. We do have some buyers from the outside, but the majority so far are from Squirrel Hill.
That is a capital project, those of you who heard our previous speaker.
Where Sampson's funeral home is.
Where Sampson's funeral home is, yeah. So it's that's a pretty large site. It's really tough to get a site that large. It's about almost 2 acres, 1.9 acres. Walnut Capital also has a project which we've marketed in and out a couple of years ago called Beechwood Commons, which is on the corner of Beechwood and Wilkins. And that was an acre site, but very, very tight neighborhood restrictions as to what could be built. Whereas the Neville Street project, across the street are 9 and 13-story buildings, and the Metropolitan is a 6-story building. But it's probably, because it's a 6-story building, it has huge terraces and a lot of really neat outside space that most buildings wouldn't have. But trying to get an 2-acre site is very difficult to amass. And we have another developer who's right now, and I can't tell you where this is, in an infill location within 5 minutes of here, who we had just amassed a parcel of almost 1 acre for him to build a condominium. And we'd like to get it a little larger before he proceeds. But we do know that we do have to meet the needs of the population that we have in our neighborhoods, and that becomes increasingly difficult because of that land and looking at what people want. So the new construction entity is a huge component of what we do. And it's about 14% of our business is new construction sales. An additional 14% is relocation. And I think it's a very interesting thing to Pittsburgh. How many of you were transferred here or chose to move to Squirrel Hill? 3. Small percentage. But I guess that probably fits in. 14% of our 30,000 sales a year are, it's probably works out to those same kind of numbers. But it is a business that actually had diminished in Pittsburgh, especially in the city of Pittsburgh. You saw huge growth of the transferee business, of corporations transferring people all over the place, and really, I think, sort of pushing their people to go to the suburbs. And because, you know, they're going into houses that they could move out of 2 years because they didn't have to do a lot of work, easy access to the airport. So I do think that during the 60s and 70s, there was a huge push to get transferees to go to the suburban neighborhoods. As a result of that, when those corporations started shrinking, you saw whole neighborhoods in the suburbs that were drastically affected by it. When Gulf Research left Pittsburgh, O'Hara Township probably had 6 streets that half the streets were not very big streets, but people that worked for the huge research center out of 28. The same thing happened in North Hills when National Steel had in one plan, Northmont Farms, they had 43 people living in it that were being transferred. And rather than just have a devastating growth of the housing in that neighborhood, we did a phased out buyout for them to buy their people out so that they didn't all want to work at one time. But now we have this interesting thing because the driving force is no longer Westinghouse. You know, they're no longer USX. Those aren't the people that are bringing the most jobs in today. It is the universities, it is the medical centers that are bringing the most jobs in. And proximity to those are in the East End. And so you're seeing resurgence in a lot of neighborhood gentrification on streets that people had lived in for long periods of time. I can remember this year somebody sold a house for, I think, $280,000 on Ludwig Street, and I had to go look at the house myself. It was beautifully redone. Beautifully redone because young people, a young professor, a young doctor can come here and really have a wonderful lifestyle. And so, but we don't like to recognize that our prices are higher than we think they are, at least as I always say to sellers in Pittsburgh. Your house is priced higher by your standards, even though you think it's a good buy for transferees. But even for the transferee coming, it is still a very good buy. Our taxes are considerably higher. Did you know if you lived in New York City and you had $1 million property, your taxes would be $10,000? I use that because it's a round number because I can have sort of impact. What do you think they are in Allegheny County?
30,000.
Yeah, it's 25 to 31 depending on the municipality you're in. As opposed to $10,000 in New York City. It'd be about 9,000 in Greenwich, Connecticut. So pretty heavily populated areas people want to live in, so that does affect our pricing. That we have to remember when somebody looks at that difference in houses, somebody's buying a $200,000 house, you know, still they've got higher taxes, and that higher tax equates to a mortgage payment that they're making. So, so it's something all of us have to be committed to getting down. Municipal government may be one of those things. Continuing today, let me give you a little background about what's happening in the real estate industry and then give you some statistics on what's going on in Squirrel Hill. In the real estate industry as a whole, we see today there's what they call consolidation of companies, bigger companies, less people. We are pleased today that we are the 5th largest real estate company in the country for full service business. And even in sales, not having offices in areas where people are coming and going all the time, even just by sales, we are the 7th largest, even without our mortgage and title businesses. So that's pretty phenomenal. We are still privately owned at Howard Hanna Company. Only Hanna family members are owners. My father and mother started the company, so they're my parents and my brother who entered. We all got our licenses when we were seniors in high school, because you can get a license when you're 18. We didn't have to go to classes back then. We did, but most people didn't. And we, so today my brother and sister and I run the company. My brother is chairman of all of our companies. I'm president of our companies, and my sister runs, she's executive vice president. She runs everything that doesn't have to do with sales. So that's anything from leases of offices to accounting to legal, everything else comes under her. We have another generation in the company today that we have 3 of the members from our next generation, my daughter and 2 nephews. One nephew is transferred to Cleveland to run our Cleveland operation. The other 2 are both attorneys. One runs our title company and the other does in-house legal work. Throughout the company we have another 10 or 12 relatives who are cousins, spouses, etc., that have found a home at Howard Hanna. And so we're pretty proud of that too, because we still consider ourselves a family company. Everybody that joins Howard Hanna goes to a Hanna family member's house for lunch or dinner or cocktails within their first year of being with us. Every new training class we have is invited to one of our houses for lunch. That is true in all of our markets, by the way. We do the same thing in Cleveland, where nephew's wife, she has to have the part of it because it's one house. We do pride ourselves on being a family company. We also pride ourselves on really being very knowledgeable about market data and market information. We're pretty heavily into technology marketing, but we also use technology for statistics. I don't know how many of you read it. Have you seen Pittsburgh Quarterly? It's a new magazine that just started this year. You've seen it. We run in Pittsburgh Quarterly, we run, and you can go onto our website and order this, statistical data of every neighborhood in Allegheny County. But for the purposes of this evening, you might want to know that Squirrel Hill last year was up by 5% in appreciation rate for last year. Almost the same as the year before, 4.6 the year before, last year 5%. This year we're anticipating about a 4% growth in Squirrel Hill prices. There is an anomaly throughout the country that there are more houses on the market today than there have been in the last 10 years at any given time. We're not as bad as a lot of markets where they went from 10,000 listings to 40,000 listings. Our listings are up about 15% in the multi list here. 2 reasons for that. Number one, a lot of people who just put their houses on the market. It's amazing, 52% of the people that put their house on the market have not bought another house yet. I think that's sort of an amazing statistic. You assume that the only time you put a house on the market is when you've already decided to move somewhere. But that number has increased dramatically over the last 5 years. Each year it gets more. People put their houses on the market, partially to see what value is, I think. So that has increased it. And as the prices have gotten higher everywhere in the country, there becomes a point where you got to say, you know, is this value real? And if I have to sell, can I get my money back? And I think we're seeing that in some of our markets a bit, certainly in other parts of the country. Florida right now, which we've all heard so much about, is off by 45% for this year, which is pretty dramatic. Now, of course, if you were a Florida broker, they would say, well, it's 45% off last year, but that was up 30% from the year before, which was up 22% from the year before, etc. But it's still a major downswing for people who have bought in the last couple of years. It may be a crisis for them. We don't get into crisis proportions in Western Pennsylvania. We don't get into crisis proportions in Squirrel Hill. We don't have those huge dips up, and we don't have those large dips down. If market-wide we had a 6%, we would be dumbfounded. 5% in Squirrel Hill is ahead of 90% of the markets that were in Western Pennsylvania. Most of those markets look at about 4.2, 4.5 is a very good year.
So Ohio the same way.
Ohio is interesting. Actually, if you go to the Cleveland metro market, which is almost 1 million people more in the SMSA, their prices are all higher than ours. But I think you get more in the older neighborhoods like Squirrel Hill. I think you get more for the same dollar there. When you go out a little farther, some of these neighborhoods are just ridiculous. The most expensive house to sell in Western Pennsylvania was 3.6. The most expensive house in Cleveland metro market, Cuyahoga County, was 8.1. So that's a big difference. And there's only 2 that have sold over 3 million. So it's not a lot of them. And they've had probably 15 that have sold over 3 million. But it's about, they run about, when you get $1 million or more, actually about 750. When you start getting to 750, it seems to me they're getting about 10 to 20% more than we get for the same house. Under 500, I think, under 500 in older neighborhoods, we get more here than we get there. So again, if you were to take Cleveland Heights and compare it to Squirrel Hill, you get a little more house here, or a little more house there than here. And their taxes are slightly less, not as dramatic as New York, but they are less than here. So, as a comparison. So we don't have those huge swings up, we don't have those huge swings down. That, we think, bodes well for a marketplace. We're very high at all of our city markets right now because we do feel that we have a natural flow of business coming into it. We do have an increase of listings. Part of that increase of listings will be because you do have a couple of new projects coming on. When you have new projects, that increases the listings. In Metropolitan, it's probably going to be ready next May, but there's probably 10 of those houses on the market. Right now, we're about to come on. There's 3 people that have bought in the Market House, which is above the Giant Eagle, that come from Squirrel Hill, 5 from Shadyside. So those are properties that will be coming on the market also. So that does increase the inventory, which increases the price. So finally, I'd just like to close because I know you were all so good to come on this heat tonight to just tell you that it has been Hanna's family's privilege to do business in Squirrel Hill for 49 3/4 years or whatever we're getting close to. I guess 50 years by my father selling there, 49 by the beginning of our business. It is still the lifeblood of our business. As I say, when throughout the country other brokers were leaving their city markets, we grew in our city market, and people are always amazed when they hear that we, in a 2.5 mile radius, we have 3 offices, that many houses can sell, but that many houses do sell, and we're proud to be part of your neighborhood. Yes?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
I'd like to hear more about your great-grandmother
Sure.
as a widow, and what did your great-grandfather do, and how was she able to...
She had money in the drawer.
And then my other question is, but I don't know if you would be aware, because Squirrel Hill supposedly is loaded with coal mines underneath. Could you tell us about that?
Well, let me go back to my grandmother, because this is really, I just came up with this recently. Today, the largest growing population of home buyers are immigrants. Pittsburgh does not have a very large immigrant population. As a matter of fact, there's a whole group of people at the Allegheny Conference that are working on trying to build immigrants here. But we don't have that strong a large group of immigrants. But we have about 23% of our buyers are single women. Nationally, it's the 2nd largest new growth group at about 20%, but we run ahead of that here. So it's pretty amazing that somebody, you imagine this, at 35 years old or something, to pack up and say, I'm going to go build a house just because the Ostergaards, those were her friends, built one. They were building one, she could go out and build one too. So I think that's pretty amazing. My great-grandfather was on city council for about 3 months, I think, at one point. He was an Irish immigrant who bought real estate. And if my mother can recall that, anybody knows the Chinatown in Pittsburgh? There's a Chinatown in a little street. But my great-grandfather, all the Chinese restaurants would come and pay my grandmother in cash their rent. So, and she did have money in the drawer. That's why I said he was a city councilman for a few months. And, I don't know, but that's how she had money to do it. I think he was an immigrant who just did really well, really quickly, and dropped dead at 40, and left her with these 2 kids, and she decided to leave the city, and that would extend her money somehow. But they stayed in that house for a long time. So.
Wait, and before you get to the coal mines,
Okay.
there's a house on, I think, Northumberland, near Murray Avenue, and it was probably a farmhouse, perhaps it's a landmark house at this point, and it could have been built like in 1880. Do you know what I mean? And
I'm trying to get it.
it was completely
On the south side,
renovated.
right?
No, here on
Here.
Northumberland.
Oh, on the south side of
I don't know.
Yes, it's south side of Northumberland, in what intersection now?
Right near Murray Avenue.
Plus, down towards-
They slowed in from the corner.
Yeah, and then plus.
I'm going to go past her now.
Towards the white.
I don't know the history of that house. I mean, I know the history of a lot of houses because one of the things we teach our sales associates still this, that you're the eyes and ears and the voice of that house every time you show it, And so you sort of have to be like a docent. You have to have a story, and you have to know the story, and you have to get the provenance. We have a house, and I'll come to the coal, but we have a house coming on the market. It's not a house, it's an equestrian center. It's a huge center. It's going to be over 10 million. A lot over 10 million. It's a big thing, It's got indoor riding stables and all this stuff. And that's what I keep saying to these sellers. Well, you started with an architect, but you didn't finish one, so we can't use his name. you know, and the builder, you started and you decided to become a general contractor yourself. We can't use their name. We need some goodies. And that is the wonderful thing about Squirrel Hill. I'm not sure how much of all of the histories that we get through the years are really researched histories. But I think, you know, people like the Mellons have lived in every house that's, you know, in Squirrel Hill. But I think it is wonderful to see the texture that is woven into the history of a house. So now I'm gonna have to go check that one out. I don't know that.
And when you check that out, as you look at the house, then to the left, there's a building that looks like a 3 or 4 unit apartment building. But
That's the odd thing about Squirrel Hill, that is, you know.
And that too is very unusual architecture, and it looks like it was built like 1900.
Now, if you go to the, yes,
I can answer a little bit of that.
oh, good.
About 50 years ago, I saw an ad for that house that you were talking about that was for sale for $35,000. I took an architect because I was interested because of the age of the house, and he talked me out of it because he said the back was separate from the front and they had tied the two pieces together. Since then, it's been sold several times. People started working on it, and it was up to maybe $200,000 in the last couple of years.
But there still wasn't anybody living in there because I was just there recently and I looked in the windows.
Well,
It's
Louise Scott
completely-
lived in there when I was,
What?
Louise Scott, the artist, lived in there when I was
Oh,
interested
did
in
she?
buying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was her house. I mean, she was renting it and then I think she eventually bought
Well,
it.
you know, here's an easy way to find out who owns it. Today, you go to the Allegheny County website and find out anything in the world. It's amazing.
I don't know about it.
Oh, good.
A young couple whose father was a developer in Mount Lebanon bought the house with the intention of moving into it. They redid it and then were relocated. Actually, they were kind of doing, his father was doing it like for free, I guess. They redid it and then they were transferred out of town, so they put it on the market. At least that's the story they told. It's on the market for over $500,000 at the last visit I've been at. There were some additions. It was built about 1880, and there was an addition built on, because obviously it
The
wasn't.
back.
Yeah, but there were 2 additions, and I believe they tore off one of the additions.
Although there is not a real estate sign.
There's not right now, but there has been. There are plenty of open houses. But you can also see the whole downstairs by going up to the window.
Okay, so here's what I would tell you to do on that one. I'm going to go get the address, and then when I go home, I'm going to go into Howard Hanna's website, okay? Because all the listings for all the malls, everything is on there. So you can check and see the price of it. But I would bet, with 500 would be the number probably. I mean, most of the streets surrounding here, you know, you're looking at numbers that are, you know, 350 to 6, 7, 8, and up.
I think it sold to the people who fixed it up. I think it sold for around $300,000. So someone from Howard Hanna sent me that information. And then they did all the work and put on the market for around $500,000.
And it is in move-in condition.
It is. I mean, it's quite well done. There's things I don't like about it, but it's quite well done.
Isn't that the wonderful thing about open houses? You can go and see these houses and see what you don't like about what people have done. On the coal, it is not just Squirrel Hill, by the way. It is, Penn Hills is probably the largest problem. There have been suits. They have to take mine subsidence insurance. Most people are not required in Squirrel Hill to take mine subsidence insurance because just having the mines doesn't make it dangerous. It's how they have mined the mines that is the problem. And it used to be that you could go to the Bureau of Mines, which was right over near CMU, which CMU's now about that building. I'm sure they moved someplace, but I'm not sure where. And the Bureau of Mines could actually pull your map out and go over it with you. And Beacon Street, there were some questions, some title questions at one point on Beacon Street, the block towards the park that curves. And it used to be we had to get the mine maps out for that. But the mine maps are used very infrequently in Squirrel Hill. Not to say they're not used, but it is less of a concern. And very few people are required to take insurance.
Are you now talking about coal in Beacon Street near Murray Avenue? Beacon Place, those privately owned condominiums, when they tore down those houses and they started to excavate for that, they came across high-grade coal.
Oh, yes.
And they had to take it out for fear that a fire could start.
Well, you know, in Pennsylvania, you don't have the coal rights anyway. You don't have any mineral rights under your, yeah. You're surprised when you come here by the time you have that big red thing, the coal notice in your deed, and you don't, it surprises people all the time because they assume that you in Pennsylvania, you don't have mineral
West
rights.
Virginia has the same thing, but
You
they're
know,
probably the only other state, utility state.
That has it. And I think a lot of that has to do with not just coal, but also oil, because, that was probably, they probably put those in at the turn of the century. They were still controlling the oil and where it was coming from. Yes?
Good statement. We say about coal. Coal problems are mostly Pittsburgh South. Because Pittsburgh coal.
Pittsburgh South has some problems,
They
yeah.
have 1 through 9 mines, but this is my dad is live with
Yeah.
Pittsburgh 1 and some.
West Mifflin.
West Mifflin.
West Mifflin has some areas.
When the Tennant's line and I they were the big ones.
Yeah.
So-
But actually, Penn Hills has had a whole area of Penn Hills. It subsided. They had actual subsidence from it. But it is not, there are very few properties that I'm aware of that today a title company requires in Squirrel Hill mine subsidence insurance. Unless it has been a mine that has ever had some activity to it, they would not require it.
Oh, the
Yes.
coal maps might be at the Bureau of Mines at Brewster, right outside of Live. They have a big facility. That's
Oh, they
where
do?
They might have moved.
Because I know they moved, yes.
You can do interactive on the web now.
For mines.
For mines. I went to a home and garden thing down at David Lawrence Center when I first arrived and was looking, oh, nice map. Oh yeah, it's my little house. And so I picked the mines, so that the genial affable guys in charge said, sure, yeah, oh look, we'll do a search for you, and they do it for free. And they came back and said, yeah, you have a mine 30 feet below your house. And we don't know what it is because it's so old. That's, I think, a lot, it's very, very old.
Where is your house? What street?
Denniston Street.
Oh.
And so I've always, I do my insurance just for my state of Pennsylvania, obviously. And they make it very easy and you pay it every year.
But you weren't required to.
Not
The
required.
title company didn't see that there was a photo
No.
in there. Yeah.
But because I'm interested in it, I discovered